Good evening. It's Monday, the 24th of March, 2025. This is a meeting of Rother District Council's Audit Committee. I'm the Chair of the committee, Councillor Brian Drayson. I'd like to welcome everyone in the chamber and online to the meeting. Before we start, just need to say, can members please make sure they speak into the microphones, remember to turn them on and off, and also put any phones on silent or off. Please don't move the microphones, otherwise you end up with the wrong name under your face when you're speaking. Those members online, and I think Councillor McGurk is the only member online tonight. If he could put his hands up if he wants to speak, use the hands up facility. And anyone else, of course, joining online. In the chamber tonight, we have Charlotte Spendley, Head of Finance, Ola Yanovitz, Principal Accountant, Anna Everett, Corporate Programme Risk and Improvement Manager, Gary Angel, the Council's internal, I know nothing special, Gary, the Council's Internal Audit Manager, Steve Akers, one of the Internal Auditors, I think that's it. Online, we have Lorna Ford, the Chief Executive of Rother District Council. We have Petra Deman, the Deputy Monitoring Officer. And Duncan Ellis, Development Team Strategic Lead. We're also being joined by our new audit partner from external auditors, Grant Thornton, Ade Oyerindi, and our engagement lead also from Grant Thornton, Anam Shazad. Good evening, Ade and Anam. Also, we are joined in the, I always leave him to last and I shouldn't, our independent member for audit, Mr. Patrick Farmer. Right, so have I missed anyone? Don't think so. Right, welcome again to everyone then. Item 1, minutes of the 27th of January 2025. I wasn't here for that one, so I'll... Thank you, Councillor Barnes and Councillor Gray. All, everyone accept them as a record? Thank you. I've just seen the time that you finished that one. It's quite quick. No hope. Agenda item 2, apologies for absence, please, Louise.
Apologies received from Councillor Pearce and also Andrew Vallance, the Deputy Chief Executive.
Thank you. And in my introductions, I did forget to introduce Louise Hollingsworth, the Secretary to the Committee from Democratic Services. Sorry about that, Louise. Agenda item 3, any additional items?
No, Chair, there are none.
Thank you. Agenda item 4, disclosures of interest. To receive any disclosures by members of disclosable pecuniary interests, other registrable interests, non-registrable interests in matters on the agenda, and the nature of any interest and any details of any dispensations obtained. Members are reminded of the need to repeat this prior to the agenda item. Are there any declarations of interest, please?
Rother District Housing Company.
Councillor Thomas?
Yes.
Chair of Rother
District
Company.
Housing.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Any others? No, thank you.
I've got my hand up, Chair.
Oh, sorry, Councillor McGurk.
Director of Rother District Housing Company.
Thank you. Yes, whilst I said by all means put your hands up, I can't promise to see them. I'll try and be better. Thank you. Agenda item 5, which is an update from our external auditors on their findings and their final report for the 2023-24. Ade, are you going to introduce this, or is it Anam?
Good evening, everyone. So Addy's struggling to get in, actually. So it'll be myself, who'll be presenting the report today. So thank you for introducing me. As mentioned previously, my name is Anam Shazad, and I am the new manager on the Rother District Council. So we wanted to provide this report to sort of introduce ourselves and to provide progress, which is limited at the moment just because the timing of the report went out when we just started on the audit. So I'll sort of just briefly talk you through our report, and I'll open myself up for any questions. So the former engagement lead, Darren Wells, on the audit has been involved on the Rother audit for a duration of 6 years, and in accordance with the PSAA Limited contractual agreements, he was required to rotate off the audit, and consequently myself and Addy, we've sort of taken over as Addy being the engagement lead and myself being the manager. So you're in good hands. Addy has over sort of 20 years of experience in the sector. As previously mentioned, the progress at the time the report was written and the submission deadline was limited. So I will just talk through what we're intending to do and the approach that we're taking for the financial statements audit for 24-25, appreciating that the 23-24 external audit was concluded in February 2025. So happy to report that it was ahead of the statutory deadline of the 28th of February, and it was an unmodified opinion. So we have moved on to the planning and interim stage of the audit straight away. And this year, one of the key changes has been carrying out the interim work alongside the planning work in an attempt to reduce the workload when it comes to the final stage of the audit. Our key audit deliverables for the year are set out on slide 6. In terms of other contents of the report, with sort of the value for money side, at this stage in our planning, we've not identified any risks of significant weakness at the council, but we will sort of continue to monitor this throughout the year to eventually report our findings towards the end of the year. Currently, our grants team are finalising the work of the 22-23 and the 23-24 housing benefits claim, and they are anticipating certifying both claims by the end of April 2025. And then later in the year, we will be picking up the 24-25 housing benefits claim with a completion end of November 2025. In terms of key events, so earlier this month, we held a session on, I think that's Addy. We held a session on financial reporting, which was sort of pleased to confirm that the finance team attended. In terms of our audit fees for the 24-25 audit, this is set sort of by and agreed by PSAA, and for the Rother District Council for the 24-25 audit, this is currently £166,904. And as I've mentioned, we've sort of outlined the key deliverables with the audit plan, which will be going to the committee in the June 2025, where we will be reporting in greater detail our plan for the external audit of 24-25 and the key risks that we've identified and the approach that we will be taking to address these. And then at the moment, our plans to issue the audit findings report is September 25, along with the annual auditor's report. And of course, as I mentioned previously, the housing benefit claim we are planning to finalise end of November 2025. Further in our pack, we've included the sector updates for the committee to consider. And at this point, I will pause and won't sort of repeat everything that's already in the report and consider any questions that you've got.
And we'll just see. I know he's missed most of it, but we'll see if Arde. Good evening, Arde. Have you got anything you want to say other than say hello?
No, and apologies to yourselves and the committee. I was having Outlook problems trying to get through, but happy to take any questions on the progress that Anab has set out. I look forward to working with everybody in due course.
Thank you. Just before I go, I have a couple of observations on the exceptional finances report. That's quite worrying how the number of councils needing it has grown and grown and grown. I love the fact that, did we come up trumps when we ended up with Grant Thornton? Because I sit at meetings, I've got a meeting tomorrow morning of regional audit chairs, and I sit there smugly listening to them with all their problems, knowing that we're up to date. And in fact, your figures, that you give the percentage in there of where you are, that you seem to be well ahead of the game. I hope any slippage in times doesn't mean that you take your foot off the accelerator. And also quite worrying where they're talking about possibly centralising the choice of auditor, which might not come to us then to pick our own auditors. They were more observations than questions, but if you want to make a comment while I look around the room.
Yeah, thank you very much in terms of that. Yes, as a firm, we did take a conscious decision to support the sector, and that was why we pushed very hard to make sure that as many of the old audits that we could do within the deadline were completed, and hence that completion rate that you alluded to well into the 80s is, has been achieved as a result of that. So as a firm, we continue to support the sector and trying to get the audit regime back on level playing field, as it were. So that's actually we're concentrating on only the last years, or we're not relying and looking at multiple years. And we'll make that continue. And we'll work with the regulators in terms of any reform that happens, and we'll continue to do the best to ensure that we'll keep that going both for yourselves and all of our audit clients as well.
Thank you, Ade. Are there any questions for Ade and Anam? Oh, you got off lightly this time because it's in between gaps. It's only a quick update. We'll save the difficult stuff for next time. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, it's resolved that we receive that report and note, is it? Yeah. Thank you. Agenda item 6, the statement of accounts for 2023-24. I believe Ola is introducing this.
Good evening. So this report is one which discusses the main issues affecting the Council's draft statement of accounts for 23-24 and provides some commentary on the core financial statements. As Anam said, the audit was only completed last month, and it was issued. We were issued with an unqualified opinion on the 18th of February 2025. During the audit, Grant Thornton found some errors, most of which have been corrected. There were some things which were just presentational, some typographical errors, but there were some others which were more involving, and it required some work to be corrected. There is a list of these in the report, so if you've got any questions about them specifically, I can talk to you more in detail. In terms of the statement of accounts, the main statement of accounts are the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. This one shows the actual financial performance for the year, measured in terms of resources consumed and generated over the last 12 months. What is the purpose of this report is to reflect the private sector accounting practice in presenting the profit and loss account. However, it looks slightly different, and also you may not be familiar with the figures when you try to compare these to the monitoring reports. That is because there are lots of entries in this report, and figures are affected by entries such as depreciation, some capital entries, and so on and so on. So the figures that are there may not be something that you would normally be seeing every quarter in every quarterly report for budget monitoring. The more interesting one for you will be the movement in reserve statement, and that is because it translates the figures and makes some adjustment to the figures and analyzes these into usable and unusable reserves. The movement in reserve statement is the one that actually shows us what the impact of the figures in the CAS is actually going to have on residents' council tax bills, because it shows how much we had to draw from the reserves. So the surplus of £9.3 million in the CIS on the provision of services shows the true economic cost. However, this figure is then different. It's translates differently to the amount that is actually charged to the general fund balance. So the actual charge to the general fund balance was 3.3 million, which was a drawdown from earmarked reserves to balance the accounts for 23-24. The earmarked reserves are being depleted, and that is the very important information from that particular statement. And it looks likely that the council will need to draw from its general fund reserve of 5 million as a result of 24-25 accounts. The next statement is the balance sheet, and this is the fundamental to the understanding of the council's year-end financial position. The balance sheet shows there are different sections to the balance sheet. It shows us the value of the council's fixed assets, also its current assets, then its liabilities. And the interesting thing there is that it shows the usable reserves and unusable reserves. If you look at the usable reserves, the balance did not change much, really. However, that was a result of changes positive changes in unusable reserves, and then a change in usable reserves as well. The usable reserves remained largely the same, because even though we did have to draw from earmarked reserves 3.3 million as a result of budget monitoring and budget deficit, we did manage to set them off through increases in capital receipts and capital grants and applied. Another part of the unusable reserves is the pension fund liability, which is shown as £1.4 million. That figure has not got a direct effect on us. It represents a long-term financial assessment of a possible shortfall or surplus on the fund based on the current situation. So even though it shows here as a liability, it does not have a short-term effect on us at all. The next statement is the cash flow statement. And the main thing to mention here is that there is a considerable drop in the value of funds that we hold. That is not only because we have, in previous years, we had large amounts held because of COVID grants. It also reflects the fact that over the last few years, we have been using our cash balances to fund capital expenditure. So rather than borrowing money from PWLB for capital purposes, we were using our internal funds in order to avoid borrowing money at really high interest rates. And then we've got also, at the end of the statement, we've got the collection fund income and expenditure account, which overall showed a surplus of £2 million. And it is made up of the council tax fund surplus of £1.9 million and a very small surplus of £59,000 on an NDR on business rates. So these show the position where we are at the moment. They are basically the figures that were budgeted for 23-24, There is a timing element to the collection that's quite complicated, but overall, that is what we were expecting throughout the year. So these figures are not a surprise to us. They were budgeted for, and that's how they are presented in the statement. I think the main thing resulting from the overall report is that the position is fairly sound. However, we are in a situation where we've got depleting balances in the reserves, and therefore it is very important for us to monitor the situation in 24-25. Obviously, we are towards the end of it. We know already that we will have to draw funds from the reserves, and the reserves are at a point where they're basically depleting. So we need to make sure that we can ensure the success of the savings strategy that we've got in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Ola. Any questions for Ola on this? Councillor Thomas and Councillor Peake.
Thank you very much for that very detailed report. You commented upon the extent to which councils are having to call upon emergency funding from the government. If this council has to last for 3 years rather than 2, how serious will that drawing upon the reserves become by the end of the 3 years, please?
I think at the moment we will probably have to draw about £1 million. So I think it all depends on the success of the savings program that we've got, the Fit for the Future. So we need to stop that process of depleting our reserves, and we have made steps. We have taken steps in the 25-26 budget setting process to make sure that we will not spend any more than we should. We have got some controls on spending in place as well. So we are trying to really to take this under control. Obviously, there will be, because of inflation, we have got pressures. We've got pressures with the temporary accommodation costs. So we'll do our best to actually give as much notice of with the information that we've got in our monitoring reports. We believe that in terms of 2 years, we probably are covered. 3 years probably is maybe difficult. But again, everything depends on the actions that we take and how this robust Fit for Future program is effective and brings us the effect that we really want to have, to stop this trend of reserves depleting, and possibly to get on a different path to actually increase them.
One of the factors which might be relevant, as you just mentioned there, is the actual inflation rate. When you calculated the future budgetary requirements, were you working on the inflation rate that was forecast, say 6 months ago, or are you working on the inflation rate which is now expected, please? Thank you, by the way, for the very detailed answer before.
Well, in terms of I wasn't involved really in the budget for 25-26, but I think it was in the very high one. It was only about 2-3%, I think, that we were looking at. So because we had our budgeting process started in October, November time, we already were looking at the situation, how it was evolving. So I would have thought that it wasn't. I'm quite fairly sure that it wasn't the very elevated interest rate that we were taking into consideration in the budget for 25-26.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Biggs. Yeah, Councillor Biggs.
Yeah, thank you. On page 68, it says report on other legal and regulatory requirements. It says they cannot sign off, conclude the audit, or sign the audit off. Does that have any repercussions for Rother? I think what we were worried about, and that's what we checked with the auditors, was whether it would actually trigger the backstop, and we were sure that it wouldn't. So, in terms of, sorry.
Yeah, I think that section specifically relates to issuing the certificates. So there are there's at least one outstanding objection. If Audit is still with us, he might be able to update the committee on where we are with the objections. So they have concluded the audit for both of those years, but they're unable to issue certificates, which is the very final stage of the process, until all of the objections have been dealt with by the external auditors. Adi, are you able to add to that, please?
In terms of the objection, that's still just going through the final checks at the moment, so I can't confirm the outcomes. But at the time we issued the opinion, we were happy that the impact we did not have a material impact on the accounts, so we felt comfortable that we could issue the opinion on the accounts. The other element that stops us from issuing the audit certificate is also in relation to WGA. Whilst we were able to complete the assurance statements, until the whole of WGA is actually certified by the NAO, we've not been given the go-ahead to be able to issue the certificate. So you will find, aside from the objection, that all local authorities' accounts will be held open until the NAO completes their whole of government's accounts as well.
I was just going to ask on that one, that so if we didn't have that objection, we'd be the same as every other council because of the WGA.
That's correct.
Yeah, thank you.
So I just want to have a question. Write-offs of uncollectible income, 106 and 244, page 125. Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Oh, yeah, so this is to do with the collection fund. So it is where we are trying to collect the council tax from residents. So in general, with this one, the figure that you are
106 and 244?
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of the write-offs, so it's actually a fairly small figure in terms of the write-offs for this one. I wouldn't know the details, so if you want me the details, I'll need to come back to you. But in general, we try not to write off almost anything for the collection fund because people still are able to pay their council tax a few years after the money was due. So, so these are the amounts that were uncollected and they were agreed to be written off by the residence manager. But I can assure you that in general we have very low figures in that respect for the collection fund.
Sorry, so you said these figures could be a couple of years old, that's outstanding debts that people haven't paid, yeah?
Yes, they would be the ones that are really for very, very old debts because in general they...
Why didn't Rother chase it up?
We do chase them up. We do chase them up, and again, I do not know the details. I would need to really get a breakdown of these and which years they related to from residents, from revenues and benefits.
Right. Just one other question. Did Rother ever take them to court for non-payment of their council tax?
We can certainly get you a written answer after the committee, but yeah, there will be a multi-stage approach and I'm sure there will be a court process attached to it.
Well, the reason I ask is because I sit in court and I deal with these cases, so I'm just wondering that how, seeing as our debt, not our debt, our reserve fund is going down and down and down, how we can just write stuff off.
Did you want to say anything?
I was just going to say, unfortunately, there are always some circumstances where you're unable to recover. So if the individual passes away, you know, some debt relief off orders, etc. So there will always be some circumstances where, despite best efforts, you are unable to secure the funds. And I suspect that's what those numbers represent. But we'll certainly dig into it and come back to you in writing.
Thank you, Charlotte. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, Chair, I apologise for not giving notice of this question. But looking through again the annual government statement, look at page 61, for example, we studiously provide a progress report column, and we equally studiously don't fill it in. Nearly all the dates, the target dates, are in fact in 2024. There is 1 March 2025 one. Can I take it that those dates have all been met, or is there some other reason why the progress report is not filled in?
Unfortunately, I can't answer in terms of progress against each of these individual targets, but I'm happy to commit to taking it away and bringing it to the next committee with an update as to progress against all of those actions, if that's acceptable.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Councillor Barnes.
I think in some way we ought to express a degree of concern about the way in which the usable reserves are falling very sharply, because in the foreseeable future we will be covering less than 2 months really of our expenditure. I know that parish councils are rather different bodies, and so too charities, and I've chaired both, but normally you keep 6 months reserves. We've customarily kept about a third of our annual expenditure in usable reserves. It seems to me uncomfortable to be in a position where, frankly, we are not actually meeting our 5 million target. I have no answer, but I think it would be wrong if the Audit Committee didn't express some concern about that position.
Yeah, yes, I mean, it is, although we're looking at what's been spent, not what's going to be spent, but yes, I share your concerns over it is going down.
Sorry, in looking at what was spent in this year, it was substantially above forecast and substantially in excess of £3 million, which is quite a major take from reserves in 1 year.
I knew you'd put it into a way. Yes, how we express that. I think we just expressed that concern at the overuse of, or the reduction in usable reserve.
We've had a very fair sketch.
I was going to say, yes, going forward, it's regrettable, but we're still just hanging on. Perhaps you can help me. There was just a note. It may come up later because I think we've discussed it on the risks. There's reference in the briefing paper to page 47 and the strategic risks, and you just mentioned housing and the risk of not meeting our housing target. Are you able to put flesh on that? Are you able to put some flesh on that note I've got? Councillor Barnes, are you able to put some flesh on that note I've got? Okay, not in this. I know it's on this page, but
I should want to talk about our current strategic risk register.
Okay, thank you. Right, any questions for Ola on the statement of accounts? No, right, in that case then, it's resolved that the Council's 2023-24 statement of accounts be approved. Can I have that moved, please? Councillor Barnes. Sorry, Councillor Gray moved it. Councillor Barnes seconded. Thank you. All those in favour, please. Thank you. It was hard to spot the councillors then. That's why I looked so surprised at how few hands were up. Right. Agenda item 7, which is the internal audit report covering the quarter up to the 31st of December 2024. Mr. Angel, our audit manager, will introduce this. Mr. Angel.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening. This is my quarterly report on the progress of the audit team. The report updates members on the current progress against the audit plan, the internal audit activity in the third quarter of 2024-25, and progress made on implementing the outstanding audit recommendations. Position update, almost all the governance audits are now complete, leaving only creditors and cyber security, both of which are still in progress. The waste contract RDC client control audit will not now be undertaken for reasons set out in the report. Summary of audit activity to the 31st of December 2024. We issued 6 reports in the third quarter of 2024-25. The executive summaries are in Appendix A as usual, which is on page 135 onwards. The audits we issued were food safety, the Delaware Pavilion and Hart Siddeley Levelling Up Fund and Programme Governance, procurement specifically focused on neighbourhood services, disabled facility grants, debtors and benefits. As usual, the main issues found in each audit are shown in the relevant executive summaries in each section entitled Level of Assurance. 5 of these audits got good or substantial assurance, meaning that no significant control issues were identified. However, the Delaware Pavilion and Hart Siddeley Levelling Up Fund and Programme Governance audit only received minimal assurance, meaning that urgent improvements in controls were required. A detailed progress update supplied by the current LOVE Programme Manager is therefore included so that members can see what action has been taken since the audit was issued. Finally, then, the implementation of audit recommendations on Para 6 onwards. The progress on the outstanding audit recommendations has been followed up, and the current position is summarised in the table in Appendix B on page 155. The old year recommendations, there are currently 15 recommendations in this section, which is 3 more than we had at this point last year and 7 more than we had the year prior to that. The number of long outstanding recommendations is therefore growing year on year. 5 of these recommendations have now been outstanding for more than 2 years, and one of these, in respect to the procurement hub SLA, is now almost 6.5 years old. Progress on all the recommendations in this section remains slow, and I'd ideally like to see the number reduced, not only to improve internal control, but also to reduce the amount of time it takes me to chase up for updates each quarter. For this reason, I'm looking to increase senior management's visibility of the long outstanding recommendations via a new audit recommendation tracker spreadsheet, which I mentioned in the report, and I intend to highlight any cases where there's been little or no movement from one quarter to the next to the corporate management team. On a more positive note, almost half of the recommendations made in the first 6 months of 2024-25 have already been implemented. Happy to take any questions on the report. Thank you.
I'm sure there'll be several coming up, mainly on one I can think of, so I'm just going to make an observation on, it was lovely to see the food safety went with flying colours, because my wife always looks at those window stickers before we go in. I never do. But it's nice to have some reassurance on those. And well, there was something else I was going to say. Oh. Yeah. Have I chaired this for 2 years? I hoped we'd had procurement sorted, but hey, it's a wonder that we've managed to procure things over the last 6.5 years without an agreement, but there we go. Right, so matter open for questions from members, and I'm sure it's going to be a lot on the Delaware and Siddeley. Councillor Thomas.
Yes, you're right, Chair. This is on the Delaware. And I've always thought of the Delaware as being almost a paragon of good management. But the report here suggests that more recently that has not been the case. There's some quite worrying statements made about the actual management of the project. For example, the person in charge of it is being paid an hourly rate, which is something which we don't approve of. We also noticed that there was a failure to name a particular officer the responsibility for the project. So that's another thing that went wrong. There were lack of deadlines. That's also complained about. And so basically, although I think, the report is saying that these things have been sorted, there is a question. You have a heading, responsibility, for these difficulties. And I think it raises the question of to what extent is it the job of the council, as it were, to monitor an organisation that's receiving funding through us, and to what extent were we aware of these failings before they became so significant? Because the consequence of that is we've got a red rating on page 143. We've got a red rating on other pages as well. So there have been all these delays and problems. So my question is, to what extent is the council, as the funding organisation here, or the one through which funding is being channelled, to what extent have we got a responsibility for the failures which are very surprising, actually, to me. Very surprising indeed, on behalf of the Delaware. Thank you.
I was just going to say, in the absence of a hand up, Mr. Ellis, I was thinking that was going to be a rhetorical question. Mr. Ellis.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Just on that specific point, the council is the accountable body for the Levelling Up funds. So ultimately, we do have responsibility for accounting for all of that funding, for doing the grant submissions and everything connected to that. So it is very much our responsibility to make sure those things are correct. And obviously the audit has flagged a number of issues. Chair, if you don't mind, could I possibly address the committee around some of the improvement recommendations while I'm speaking, and then take any further questions? Would that be okay?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. So thank you for the opportunity. While I have got some very positive news this evening regarding the improvement recommendations and the progress that's been made, I'd also just like to take this opportunity to apologise to the committee and the wider members regarding the outcome of the audit, as I can very much appreciate that having an audit with a minimal assurance rating is not where anyone would like to be. The report states that I've been the senior responsible officer for the programme since last summer. And while the programme dates back to January 2023, it's been my responsibility to keep the programme on track since that time. And I was brought in specifically to try and address some of the issues that have been flagged within the report this evening. Just to give the committee some confidence, hopefully, the programme for the future, we've engaged a new programme manager in Chris Payne. So Chris has pulled together a lot of these responses. He's been in place now for a couple of months, and we've also instigated a number of governance improvements and reviews specifically to address some of these issues that have been found as part of the audit. We've also engaged a new quantity surveyor, and that surveyor will support with cost scrutiny and challenge from the council's perspective over the coming months, which is also a positive step. In terms of the recommendations themselves, there's 14 recommendations that were made as part of this report, and you'll be able to see from the progress report that 9 of those have already been completed and signed off. That leaves 5 that are outstanding, but 4 of those have been progressed as far as we've been able to. So that leaves recommendation 2.3 outstanding in terms of the collaboration agreement. Just one thing to note in terms of the collaboration agreement, while it is important that we have something in place for that, it's not a legally binding agreement. It's effectively a set of terms as to how we will work in partnership and collaboration for this project. So one of the things I've tried to do recently, and we've had lots of drafts of the collaboration agreement, we haven't been able to finalise those to date. We have put a memorandum of understanding in place, which is also intended to address how we will work together. That's going to the Delaware board this Friday, hopefully for sign-off, and a number of members and senior managers have been involved in drafting that update. So just to be clear, as I've mentioned, the accountable body is the council. The Delaware Pavilion are very clear that that responsibility rests with the council and the Section 151 officer. So I think we are clear with them on that point. I've mentioned very briefly that 4 of the other outstanding recommendations have been addressed as far as possible. So recommendation 2.3, there is a requirement to have a risk workshop, but I can confirm that has been completed now. It hadn't been completed at the time that this report was issued. Similarly, recommendations 1.31 and 1.32 have been addressed as far as we are able, in as much as we have applied to central government requesting an extension to the funding deadlines through to December 2027. They did confirm when we made that application, though, that they wouldn't come back to us to let us know what the outcome was until after the spring budget. And while last year that was at the start of March, this year's spring statement isn't expected until this Wednesday. So we still haven't had confirmation, formal confirmation from them about that extension. But in terms of the recommendations, we have progressed those issues as far as we're able. And I'm expecting confirmation within the next couple of weeks from central government regarding that. Recommendation 2.1 talks about the contract with the the project manager, and Councillor Thomas has alluded to that in his question. So there are lots of contracts within this programme that are time limited, and they are based on outcomes and design outcomes. So that price and that contract is fixed. The contract that this recommendation specifically relates to is actually about the programme management. And you will see that we've taken on board the auditor's recommendations, but we've also flagged that there will be some instances potentially where it is very difficult to restrict the contract for a certain specific time, because there can be issues through no fault of the programme manager that delay the contract and extend the programme of work. So they might be, for example, a planning refusal that might extend the length of the contract. There might be delays with internal or external decision making from other partners. So there are various things that could impact on that programme, and it wouldn't always be reasonable for us to assume that those companies will effectively not charge additional costs if they are being expected to work longer on a programme. Obviously, we will do everything we can to try and manage that and try and minimise that and remove it wherever possible. But I just thought it was important to note that there are some examples of contracts where, yes, ideally, we'd always like a fixed price, but there will be some situations where it is difficult for that to actually happen. And we may find, if we insist on putting some of those things in for certain contracts, that the external market will not sign up to that, because it puts all the risk onto them. And as I've outlined, it may be through no fault of their own that they are having to do additional work. So thank you for that opportunity, Chair. I hope some of that gives the committee some more confidence off the back of what I know is a disappointing outcome in terms of the audit report. And I'm happy to take any more specific questions now, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I know Mr. Farmer has a question for you. I was just going to say, so what happens after the spring statement if the government pull the plug?
I think that is, it's a risk in terms of the project. I think nationally, I think we've been in committee before where we've talked about the Levelling Up Fund, but nationally there has been a challenge around delivering to the time frame. So only a few months ago there was 80% of round 2 of the Levelling Up Fund. So this project falls into round 2. 80% was underspent and behind deadline. So I think there is an understanding from central government that there have been significant challenges nationally around this programme, and they wrote to us specifically in November accepting that there is an understanding in central government around this issue, and they were keen that people put forward a realistic time frame for delivery, and they said they would consider extensions through till March 2028. So that's in recognition of the challenges that have been faced, not just specifically with this project, but across the country. So I think officers are confident that that extension will be granted, but until it has been granted, I can't guarantee that that will be the case. I think we've got very positive progress, particularly on the Heart of Sidley project. So Gary alluded to the fact that this programme covers Delaware Pavilion and Heart of Sidley. And again, members will be aware from reading the report that the Heart of Sidley project was not really where the focus of the recommendations were. It was very much on the Delaware side of things. But that scheme is progressing well. We've fed back in terms of the returns and the meetings we've had with central government about how well that project is doing. So I think the chances of central government withdrawing that funding are very, very slim. But as I've said, until we get formal confirmation of that, I can't guarantee that that is not an issue we would need to address.
Yeah. Okay, I've got Mr Farmer, then Councillor Barnes, then Councillor Thomas. Mr Farmer.
The point, Mr Chairman, I'd like to make is a wider one than this particular project. If we look back for this year, Gary's come to this meeting and told us about a particularly poor audit, which has exposed, I think, a failure of management to have the right either people or processes, and I don't know which, although Gary probably does, in place to ensure these don't only get found out when we do an internal audit. It seems there is a pattern that the senior management team are asleep at the wheel on some of these projects. Either they haven't got the right people in place to monitor them or the right processes in place to monitor them. I wonder also, this isn't this committee, but you have an overview and scrutiny committee, and you wonder what they are scrutinising if these sort of incidents across a whole wide range of programmes indicate that the management team is not on top of what's going on in this council.
Lorna.
Thank you, Chair. It's an absolutely reasonable question, Mr Farmer, but I think one of the problems with the way that audits get reported, undertaken or reported through committee is that quite often action can be taken and that's not necessarily reflected in the reports that we have before us. So I cast members' minds back to the restructure that we did last year, and we're finally getting the final pieces of that restructure in place now. And some of the changes that we made there were absolutely in response to some of the weaknesses we had around our project management. If you recall, we also set up a new team, the capital delivery team, which at the moment Duncan is leading. And that the purpose of that team was to really understand our capital programme and to make sure that we are following through on the processes that we have in place. I'm sure Anna will also be able to speak to the changes that we've made to our corporate programme board. So this is a board that has oversight of our projects, and that has changed the way that it's working. It's working much more effectively now, and we've absolutely got the progress against our projects and the risks against our projects understood at that senior leadership level. So absolutely preempted some of the weaknesses that are now coming through the way that the projects have and programmes have been managed in the past, and we've got the final piece of that new structure now in place with the appointment of our Director of Governance and Community, who's also our monitoring officer. So what we've embedded in there is the golden triangle, so the relationship between the head of paid services, section 151, and the monitoring officer right at the top of the structure to ensure that that good governance filters through the whole of the council. So absolutely right to ask the question, but I do feel that the changes that we've made over the last sort of year really and now starting to come into effect, and the new structure reflects that. Thank you for that opportunity, Chair.
I suppose the only comment I would make is then I won't be around to see it, but I hope therefore that future audits that Gary does do not expose such weaknesses as he has in the past. Thank you.
You mean you won't be looking at the meetings and studying the papers? Just out of pure interest?
Probably not.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, I think it's a fair observation that we had a very ambitious capital programme and not the capacity to deal with it. And the changes that took place in the course of the last months of last year hopefully have addressed that problem. I think at some stage, and it's implicit, I think, in Patrick Farmer's comments, we really do need, and I suspect it's this committee, because we have responsibility for the risk register, we really would like, I think, an assessment of how the new arrangements are working. A little way down the line, because the final building block has really only just been put into place. It worried me, looking at this particular report, that Duncan, who had so many other responsibilities, was actually also responsible for almost project managing this. And Chris Payne was appointed not until halfway through January 2025, which is very late to have a project manager take charge. Another area that concerned me, though, and it came out again in the briefing that we had as councillors on Thursday, is the size of the project is much larger than the 19 million that is coming, we hope, from government. I believe that money is already in our hands, so it would be quite interesting if they did cancel it to see what would happen. But I can't believe that they will try and reclaim millions from around the country from various authorities. That said, I'd like some clarity on what is now the date we've applied for. It clearly is not March 2026. Have we applied for a deadline as late as March 2028 or slightly earlier than that? Because that seems to me absolutely crucial that we monitor progress against that. Again, it seems to me absolutely crucial that in the project we prioritise two things. One is the health of the building, the long-term health of the building. The other is we maximise the opportunities for the trust to bring revenue in. And there are certain capital improvements that are going to be made to the Delaware, which will actually improve their revenue earning opportunities. Those seem to be the top two priorities. And I would welcome an assurance, really, from either Lorna or Duncan, that the capital programme will be structured in such a way, and the grant money is allocated in such a way, that those two have top priority. So some of the other things, which are desirable, but which may be difficult to fund, are left on one side to the later phases. So we do ensure that the absolute essentials are delivered out of the money that is available. It does seem to me that the trust, who have no financial liability whatsoever as far as I can see, are driving a very ambitious programme. I understand why they are, but it makes me absolutely adamant that we need to say to our management team, prioritise, make sure that the absolute essentials are done, and then prioritise revenue raising, because the Delaware is going to go on being an expensive liability for someone, and we do need to leave that building in the best possible condition and in the best form to actually meet its revenue costs. The rest is desirable, but not essential. But I'd like to know the closing date. I do think this committee needs to keep a very close eye on this one because it is an experiment. We're working with partners. You are seeking to leverage in all kinds of other grants, some of which are identified already, the Heritage Lottery, others not. And at the end of the day, a 45 million project for which we have responsibility but not total control is more than a little worrying.
Well, before he put his hand up, I saw Duncan nodding his head quite a bit through what you were saying there. But Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. Just to address Councillor Barnes's issues in turn, just to clarify, we've had Chris in place as the programme manager now for a number of months. We did have a previous programme manager in place as well, but we made the decision to change that, to bring in a fresh pair of eyes, to review, as I said earlier, we had the governance audit from Gary and his team. We took that opportunity to make some changes to ensure that those improvements carried on progressing and could give the council and the members the confidence that we could deliver this project. And it is a complicated project. Again, as Councillor Barnes has alluded to, we have a master plan and a vision for the future. But that vision is potentially a £45 million project, and we've got around £18 million at the moment. We are looking at submissions to Heritage Lottery Fund, and they have been positively received. So the Heritage Lottery Fund, for example, have given us £230,000 to build up a bid to submit to them, because they asked for lots of additional supporting information to support that bid application, and that bid could draw down a further £10 million potentially for this project. There is also significant fundraising that the Delaware is doing specifically to try and bolster that budget. But we are very conscious and very aware that at the moment, as we sit here this evening, the funding that is confirmed is the Levelling Up funding and the SIL funding. So the council has awarded £850,000 worth of SIL funding. So we are working within that budget envelope to understand what we can deliver as part of the phase 1 works. We will have confirmation from Heritage Lottery Fund in September as to whether that new submission has been successful. And we are looking to package the programme so that as and when new funding becomes available and is confirmed, we can add to the works, and that's the same in terms of the fundraising that I've already mentioned. In terms of the deadlines, the programme at the moment is looking to complete in December 2027, and my advice to the council was that rather than pushing the deadline for the funding to the maximum in March 2028, I felt that lots of other authorities would be doing the same thing. And actually, if we were looking to complete in the 2027 calendar year, that there may be advantages to address the risk, Chair, that you have raised around potential loss of funding. But if we can demonstrate delivery ahead of that ultimate red line that the government have set, that would be beneficial. So the deadline we have applied for is December 2027, and the programme is aligned so that that is achievable and realistic. So that's the deadline that we have asked for. And just to agree with John, as you said, Chair, I was vigorously nodding my head while John was talking. But absolutely, in terms of prioritisation, the health, maintenance and longevity and sustainability of the building and the building fabric is a key driver for this project. As is the ability of the trust to deliver more income so it can become more sustainable. Members will be aware that we do provide a significant annual grant to support the Delaware at the moment, and the more sustainable they can become for the future, the better, whether that's for ourselves over the short term or whether that's for a new unitary authority. And there are a number of objectives that we have to meet in terms of this funding delivery, and those two were specifically the ones that Levelling Up Fund was allocated for, so sustainability and future of the business but also of the building. And similarly with the Heritage Lottery Fund, they have 4 key pillars, and those two, protecting heritage and the sustainability of the operator, are very, very key in terms of drawing down any additional funding. So that is absolutely something we are focusing on in terms of the money we currently have available and what could be delivered in terms of the phasing as the project progresses. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Duncan. Just before I go to Councillor Thomas, I think Councillor Barnes just wants to come back on that. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, I'm no accountant, but it seems to me that if we phase it so that the government money is employed in the first phase, then we should be able to meet that target. And it doesn't prejudice having later phases as and when we get the funding. And that's really, I think, what we should be recommending as an audit committee.
Yes, I'll just go to on the basis that Duncan and Lorna were both nodding then. I think that's okay. And we'll include that in the minutes. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I just want to make very clear that I've got every confidence in Gary Angel, whose report is so thorough, and that's why we know what the situation is. I've got full confidence, obviously, in Mr. Ellis, whose financial competence is legendary, and I have full confidence in Lorna Thorpe, because what the Council has done is to put into being the structures we need to make sure these things don't happen again, and the personnel to make sure they don't happen again. So we're set up now, so things are going to work properly. Having said that, though, I do think it's worth actually quoting what it says on page 138, and this was the particular criteria. I quote, "Grant funding conditions are understood and adhered to by all relevant parties, and compliance is closely monitored. Grant receipts are monitored to ensure they are correct." Now, you would have thought that was the lowest common denominator of expectations for any major project. I think Bexley and Bloom do that when there's £300 at stake, and here £20 million are at stake, and yet that's put down as red. So something has gone seriously wrong. And I think I'd like to take up Mr. Farmer's point, because obviously the council has to strike a balance, doesn't it, between the autonomy of an organisation like the Delaware Pavilion, or indeed the housing company, and on the other hand, the council's duty to ensure that public money is spent well. And so the first question is to ask whether in fact that balance tipped in the wrong direction, and that's why Mr. Farmer has talked about these problems being recurring. Is there, in situations like this, maybe too much trust put onto a particular organisation? And the Delaware, let me stress, is an organisation that I have regarded with unalloyed admiration until this evening, okay? So maybe that's the reason. But the second question you have to ask is about the Delaware and its management structures. If you read what is said on pages 138 to 143, I think you've got to ask the question, is there a cultural problem here at the Delaware? Is there something wrong with the culture, that it has simply not been careful enough in the way in which it's gone about actually managing this particular project? So those are two questions. Has the council tipped over too far towards allowing autonomy and not supervised enough in this particular case, possibly because it saw the Delaware as a totally trustworthy organisation? And secondly, is there a cultural issue within the Delaware Pavilion that the Delaware needs to address, and that maybe we need to flag up to the Delaware as something they need to look at? Thank you, Chair.
Well done. I wondered which one of them would weaken first, and Duncan put his hand up first. You're saved, Lorna. Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. I think just to clarify, it would be useful, the audit, while the audit has been undertaken on the programme and the governance and the finances, it is focused internally on the council's processes. So I don't think we should be conflating that internal review with any processes that the Delaware have. So this is very much an internally focused process. The council, as I've mentioned, is the accountable body. So it's for the council to get these things right, to put the correct governance structures in place, to get the right resourcing in place to address the issues. And hopefully in my introduction and with the recommendations and the actions we have taken to date, you will see some very positive progress in actually addressing those. There have been some issues previously around the financial side of things with the grant and the processes. So there was, for example, a £400,000 Arts Council grant that had been spent, that was included as part of the previous budget. but often you use grant funding from various bodies to match fund, which is exactly what we're doing with the Heritage Lottery. So we're match funding the Levelling Up Fund to demonstrate that we have got a bigger project to deliver. But actually that £400,000 has now been removed from the budget because it had been spent, so it's not showing there as being available. And there were also some issues around process in terms of the grant and notification of requested extensions. So there are formal processes in terms of the grant terms and conditions. There are formal processes that we have to follow, for example, if we are requesting an extension. Having said that, the processes we have followed recently for the extension have been requested specifically by MHCLG and central government. They don't comply with their own process that they have outlined in the grant terms and conditions, but I've met with them personally and they have said this is how they want the extension requests to come through, and effectively that was part of the November monitoring process where we were able for the first time to allocate costs through until March 2028. So we've never been able to do that before because the grant returns have been locked to the deadlines that central government has specifically set. But like I said, there is a wider understanding in central government now about the challenges that have been faced. So they have requested that we do things for this extension outside of their grant terms and conditions. But that is the process that they asked us to follow. So there have been some anomalies with that process. But yeah, I just thought hopefully, Chair, that gives some clarity and some further confidence to Councillor Thomas as well specifically. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. Well, I don't know. He's got his hand up again, so we'll find out. Councillor Thomas.
Just a single sentence, actually. With the housing company, the council, in my opinion, quite properly, actually, make suggestions to the housing company. And I think that's a good process. It helps to keep us on our toes, frankly. And I think the same could apply to the Delaware Pavilion. I don't think there has to be a division between the council's responsibility and what is the responsibility of the Delaware Pavilion. I think in a good relationship, a good partnership, you can make suggestions and have a reasonable expectation that the good ones will be acted upon. Thank you.
I do find it bizarre, Chairman. The government is departing for its own formal processes, and I trust nobody is going to subject that somewhere, it won't be us, to legal challenge of some kind. I mean, if I were a government auditor, I think I would be somewhat startled by that proposition.
I suppose one is we're slipping into Trump territory, and then the other would be, what was I going to say you were? Yeah, I suppose they could say, well, that was the last government wanted it this way and we want it this way. So it's, I know. Right.
You don't think the application process goes anywhere near ministers?
Sorry. Yes, Councillor Biggs.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, page 143 makes very, very worrying reading. When you look at all the reds and the bits and pieces, I've listened to everybody talking and the answers. I don't know if I listened to the answer to this one. It does say a detailed contingency arrangement should be put in place in case the government refuses to extend the funding deadline beyond March 2026. Have we got one?
Sorry, Duncan, I was busy reading. I missed your hand up.
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to answer Councillor Biggs's question, if that's okay. But yes, the authority does have alternative funds available, but it would mean potentially prioritising other schemes. So we have capital receipts, for example. The council is able to borrow. Obviously, if the money was recovered now, we've spent around £3 million on the project, so we wouldn't be exposing ourselves to the full £17 million of grant funding, and £1 million of that is funded by community infrastructure levy, but it would mean that the council would have to review how it funded the project to date. It would put the outcomes in jeopardy if that levelling up fund was reduced or removed. Like we've talked about, there is an opportunity for similar sizable chunk of money potentially from Heritage Lottery Fund, but we would need to review and fund that in a different way, which may mean that other projects within the programme might not be able to be delivered in the same way we anticipated.
Thank you. Just one other question. Have we ever seen a bar chart of how these works are going to take place, over the length of time it's going to take place, the cost it's going to take place?
Yeah, I don't think the committee has seen anything like that. As part of the programme management, there is a programme that takes the delivery of the project through to December 2027. So all of that governance and those work programmes are in place. And we're currently working through the timings of the funding drawdown. Obviously, that will potentially be impacted further by any Heritage Lottery Fund award. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. I'll come to Councillor Barnes, which just struck a thought in my mind, is that perhaps the overview and scrutiny need to see that. But Councillor Barnes.
Yes, I think given the risk, actually, it probably ought to be this committee rather than overview. But if we've finished on this, I think there are a couple of wider points that we probably need to ask. One is outstanding recommendations. I really am concerned that this is a lengthening total, not a shortening total, and that some of them have gone on for ages. I'm also worried by the paragraph which says that although we've put a mechanism in place in which progress should be charted, some senior officers are not filling it in. So I think really this committee has discussed before how we might do this. I think one or two of the responsible officers might be asked to come and explain why there has been no progress. It's about the only sanction we have, but I think it's time to actually exercise that. The other thing I would like to ask the Chief Executive is whether we can have an assessment of the progress made by the new mechanism at some stage in the summer months, because I think it'd be useful to know how is it bedded down and Lorna's evaluation of its success.
Thank you. Come to Lorna first.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think I have been as frustrated as Gary, well, perhaps almost as frustrated as Gary over some of these recommendations. And it was after a discussion with myself and Gary that we decided to bring all of the recommendations into one place, so it was easier to monitor. So we now have a spreadsheet with all of its external ones and the internal ones, so we can keep a track on them. And we've also been reviewing our statutory officer group terms of reference to make sure that we have a focus on this as well. And we've made sure that Gary will be invited along to that statutory officer group to discuss the recommendations and what we need to do to get some of these finished. We need to fundamentally make sure that they're still actually relevant and there's not another solution to them. So, you know, those sorts of discussions need to take place as well. But I just want to let you know that we absolutely see this as a priority in getting these recommendations down. And I agree about holding individuals to account when, you know, we've had very long outstanding recommendations. So, yeah, you've got my support there with that, and I can reassure you that we are taking this seriously at Statutory Officers Group as well as SLT.
Thank you. I was going to say, I think at one point when we discussed it, there was suddenly a number of results appeared when we discussed having officers come to the committee. So who knows, perhaps it could come again, but definitely we'll look at that in the new year. There'll be possibly a new committee. But to me, and I say it every time, I'm sorry, it just shows the value of Gary and his team, his whole massive team of 2 people. Steve is here tonight and Susie isn't, but the work they do it's just tweaking those things and pointing out that what officers think is happening hasn't actually happened and isn't happening, and it gives them an opportunity to look back. Now, because I've said that, I've obviously annoyed Anna Everett because she's got her hand up and she wants to say something. Anna.
I hope I haven't missed the boat with my comments about the Delaware Pavilion and the audit report. But going back to process, especially on risks, I think you will have noticed over the last couple of years that when a couple of years ago we had quite a high risk appetite for projects and for spending money on new initiatives, and you will see that last year we reduced the appetite quite significantly, and this year it's later on the agenda, but we're looking to reduce the appetite again. So corporately, we are more conscious of not taking risks, especially concerning our reputation and financial spend. And the other thing I didn't want to miss the boat on was my assessment as the risk coordinator is that when we first got this money for the LUF projects, we were at risk from the very beginning. The risks were there from the beginning because of the nature of the building being a complex build with it being listed. Actually, the amount of money we had was £20 million ever going to be enough. And also the really tight deadlines. And so we have been in mitigation with this project, I think, from the very beginning. But we've had to tolerate a certain level of risk, but we've thrown quite a lot of mitigations at it, particularly the appointment of Duncan to concentrate on the project and the specialists that he's brought in, plus the new structure that Lorna mentioned with a corporate programme board. But some risks you can't always mitigate, but as I said, reflected in the policy where we are reviewing and reducing our appetite, it hopefully will all come together as we move forward. I just wanted to give it a bit of context, really.
Thank you. Yeah, and I was going to say that oldest one of the procurement, it implies it's on the verge of being signed, but who knows? No, and obviously we've had change of place with Sill that Mike Hughes has inherited from Gillian. So, but hopefully, what Lorna has put in place and what Anna said is actually addressing those. And as I said, I'd still like to thank Gary and his team. So are there any more questions on any of these? Because Gary's got a second part later on about the plan. Yeah. Right, so can we note that internal audit report, please? Thank you. There'll be lots of things I'm going to have to be looking at in the minutes. Yes, yes, yeah, yes. That's why I said I'll be reading those minutes closely. Sorry? Yeah. It's hard to phrase. So those things that we've discussed as add-on bits that aren't in the noting, are you happy for us to make them recommendations to the council? If so, I need a mover and a seconder. It's the Gray and Barnes show tonight. Councillor Gray, Councillor Barnes. Thank you. We'll put those on to recommendations from this committee. Thank you, Louise. Agenda item 8, Treasury Management Update, quarter 3 of 24-25. Charlotte, introducing this, our Head of Finance. Charlotte.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, some key matters to note in this particular report. Overall investment levels remained high at 27.4 million at the end of the quarter end. That was only just down slightly on the mid-year position by 1.4 million. Interest earned forecasts have reduced from the mid-year position and we're now projected to yield just shy of 1.3 million against a 1.316 million budget. That figure, though, doesn't include the anticipated interest due from the housing development company of 350,000, so that will be in addition to that position. We continue to utilise internal borrowing in quarter. However, you will see once the Q4 report comes forward to you that we have taken a short-term local authority loan of 2.5 million for a 1-month period. Outstanding loans reported within this report at the end of Q3 were at 26.4 million and our net financing cost to net revenue stream had deteriorated slightly to 0.94%, and that was due to the reduction in income forecast. As covered in the report, CPI rose in quarter, peaking in November at 2.6%, and our Treasury advisors forecasts now anticipate the Bank of England reaching their 2% target by late 2025. You might have noted that the January CPI is at 3%, so it is trending upwards at the moment. We did receive some good news, as covered in the report, that the statutory override for pooled funds following the consultation in the local government settlement has been extended to the 1st of April 2029 for existing investments. That is positive from our perspective because it means negative movements in those funds will continue to not affect the budget and council tax levels. Our fund investments did rally slightly in quarter from both the Q1 and the mid-year position, but do remain down on the original investment. The most significant update, which was touched on at the last audit committee, is that of the Hermes Property Fund. We've noted a detailed update in the report, but following a high number of investors removing their investment from the fund and the resulting sale of assets in a challenging market, the fund is no longer viable in its current form. There was an EGM in February. 95% of the votes cast at that EGM were in favour of the proposed merger with L&G Managed Property Fund. The fund, as in the Hermes Fund, is currently suspended for settlement redemption, so we wouldn't be able to extract our funds even if we chose we wanted to do so at this stage, and that's to provide some stability to the fund whilst the fund manager assesses available options. The trust manager is continuing now, following that vote, with the due diligence for the proposed merger. Notable for us is that RDC will be ineligible to participate in the merged fund should it proceed, as only pension funds are able to participate in that particular fund. However, the positive of it moving towards that merger is that we would be able to take earlier receipt of the proceeds than if the fund was to completely terminate. The current loss on the fund is 430,000. I would just note that interest earned on that fund in the current financial year is estimated to be 105,000, and interest earned over the term since we've held the Hermes Fund, which was July 2018, the council invested in that fund, is 642,000 over the entire term. Just putting that into the context of the loss on the investment, the 430. I'll pause there, Chair. Happy to take any questions there might be. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Farmer.
Assuming this merger goes ahead and you end up having to realise the loss, has that been factored into the budget for this year?
Not currently. We weren't aware of the details of the fund merger at the point at which the budget was settled or drafted. So yeah, it's not currently anticipated in the budget position, so it would be a draw on reserves.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, the statutory override is good news. I mean, it's bad news, although actually we made a profit on it overall, though some of that may have been wiped out by inflation. Have we got a reserve which will cope this, or will it come from our usable reserves in some way?
Yes, unfortunately, we've no specific earmarked reserve set aside for this scenario, so it would have to be met from the general reserve. Just in terms of the interest earned on the Hermes Fund, if it's of interest to members, I did do a little bit of maths earlier. The interest that's been earned over the term equates to around 2.76%. However, if you were to take the loss out of the equation, it's under 1%. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? No hands up on the screen. Right, thank you. Note that report? Yes. Okay. Agenda item 9, review of internal audit. Mr. Angel.
Thank you, Chair. This is my annual self-assessment of the effectiveness of Rotherham Internal Audit Service compared to the public sector internal audit standards. Excuse me. This will be the last assessment I do using the old standards, as next year's assessment will be based on the global internal audit standards, which are effective from the 1st of April 2025. I carried out the latest self-assessment by evaluating our activities against a 40-page checklist, which I was shared with the Chair, and I'm happy to supply to anyone else that wants to see it. But I've mercifully given you a summary in the report, so you don't have to wade through all that lot. The summary is in Appendix A, page 179 onwards. Tick in the Y column is compliance with the standards. Tick in the P column is partial compliance, and N is no compliance. No new issues were highlighted by this review, and it's pleasing to report that Rotherham Internal Audit Service continues to meet the vast majority of the standards. This view is also supported by the findings of the latest peer review, which came a couple of years ago. Appendix B, page 185, provides an update on last year's action plan. Most of the action points in this have either been addressed or will be as part of the 2025-26 action plan. Now, a big one section in this report is all about the new standards. It's page 174. The public sector internal audit standards are being replaced, I've just mentioned, by the new global standards on the 1st of April. These new standards need to be interpreted for the UK public sector in accordance with the application note issued by the UK Public Sector Internal Audit Standards Advisory Board and the SIT for Code of Practice for the governance of internal audit in local government. So there's the global standards, and there's an application note, and there's SIT for guidance as well, and you've got to comply with all of those. Links to both these other documents are at the end of the report if you're interested in reading them. The biggest change, though, brought about by the new standards will be the need for greater involvement of senior management and the Audit Committee in shaping and supporting the internal audit approach. I will therefore need to discuss these requirements with SLT, senior management, and members of this committee in the first half of 2025-26 in order to seek your understanding, approval and support for the new approach, including agreement of a number of what they define as essential conditions specified in Domain 3 of the standards. Will become clear when you see the standards. In addition to this, I have also identified a number of other actions that will need to be carried out in the coming year, and these are set out in Appendix C. This is to help us move towards conformance with the new standards. I'm going to provide you with a progress update in my next committee report. I think I'll be also producing a new charter, updated charter of internal audit and a strategy. In conclusion then, this report demonstrates we continue to operate to a high level of effectiveness. However, moving forward, both senior management and the audit committee will need to help me shape and support the internal audit approach if we to conform with the global standards. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Just before I go to Jess, I think your offer for the training will be snapped at. I see a couple of them involve the chairman of the audit committee doing much more. That's fine. Any questions for Gary on this review of the internal audit? Councillor Thomas.
Just one question. These new standards, are they more rigorous than the old standards, or are they simply different? Please.
I think you could say, I mean, they're 4 times the size of the old standards, with simple paper. I think they're much more prescriptive. They're broadly in line with the principles in the old standards. They're just broken down more, and they're looking more for evidence of conformance than just saying we conform, when they want to see evidence as well. Like I say, the change with involvement of senior management and the audit committee, rather than being sort of bystanders to a lot of things, they want you to try and we need you to agree my approach, not just through discussion, not just when I can be afraid to complete a report at the committee, but to support and provide any support we need to implement it. So it's a little bit more two-way street, I suppose, on the new standards. But I don't think it's something we shouldn't be able to do. It's just I'll probably need to give you a training session on them, because if I don't know if any of you have looked at the link and the stuff, they're quite involved, and you probably need someone to guide you through them. And of course, some of the things that are in those global standards don't apply. I mean, there's only a limited number of things that this applies to, but some of them don't apply because they are global standards for all sectors, and there's certain things in local government, public sector, we would do differently. So that's why there's application note and things like that, and code of practice.
Just a little bit there about the chair of the audit committee. We'll do blah, 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 blah. I have to say, I have intended over the last year to have lots of meetings with Mr. Angel, but the timing of the meetings compared with the timing of the audits made it not a lot of point. So hopefully somehow they can be tied up it may even mean changing the pattern of the audit meetings to meet the audit. But then we've also got the external auditors trying to balance, so we'll see. Any other questions? Councillor Barnes.
Yes, we have to conduct a self-assessment, and that will need to go in the work programme, but clearly some training on these standards, if we are to have any constructive input, I think should be arranged.
I think it will be.
Maybe that should be added to the work programme.
Yes. Yeah. Because we know, it's not like we don't know when, we know when. So, once a new committee is formed.
Yeah, I think I need to discuss it with my colleagues in Project Services how best to go about it. But I foresee we'll probably have some informal meeting through Teams or something to take you through some slides, not be deaf by PowerPoint hopefully, but to share the key points and what we need and what I need to seek your agreement to. And there's also a process in there, what I've got to do if you disagree with any of the things. So, because hopefully we'll get agreement to everything, but that's what we'll work towards, but we'll see.
Just speak slowly. That's all. Right, so any questions for no? Right, so this one we're resolving that the review of internal audit 24-25 be approved, and that the key additional requirements of the Global International Audit Standards UK Public Sector, it is a mouthful, I thought that when you said it, be noted, and in particular those which require the support of the Audit Committee to introduce, and we'll almost add to that, and the requirement for training for the Audit Committee members on the new standards. Can somebody move that, please? Councillor Gray. Oh, Councillor Biggs jumped in ahead of Councillor Barnes. Councillor Gray, Councillor Biggs. Thank you. Oh, all those in favour, please show. Oh, Councillor Barnes, you in favour of that? Thank you very much. Thank you. Agenda item 10, Anna's big moment. Corporate risk register and review of risk management policy. Anna.
Thank you, Chair. So, as you said, two parts to this report, which is a review of the policy and then to note the risk register. If we look at the review of the policy first, you will note that in the policy, it contains the risk appetite scores and descriptors, and the proposal is to amend 3 of those, and these are social, and currently the risk appetite is cautious, medium risk, and we would like to amend this to minimal stroke cautious with a reduced target score of 8 in order to minimise any financial losses and protect the needs of the community as we move into local government reorganisation. The second one is around project and programme. The risk appetite is currently open and high risk. The proposal is to amend this to minimal and low risk, which I think is quite pertinent to the conversation we've just had about the Delaware Pavilion audit, with a target score of 8. And the target score has been exceeded consistently over the last few years. And when the risk policy was first introduced, our appetite for this was very high. So this is the second proposed reduction in the risk appetite score in 2 years. Lastly, the economic and financial risk appetite. Hang on, have I done them all? I should have said that one first. Economic and financial, it's to reduce that one from open and high risk to minimal and low risk. I missed that one out at the beginning. So that's the first part of the review of the policy, to reduce those 3 risk appetite scores. And of course, they each have an associated narrative. And you will see from paragraphs 9, 10 and 11, there's the alternative proposed wording. Are you okay for me to move on, or are there any questions at the moment?
Any questions on Councillor Biggs?
One question, Anna. What is the timescale you're hoping to reduce it from open risk, high risk to low risk? Is there a timescale?
Yeah, if you are happy, it would be immediately.
It just might take longer to get it down. Councillor Thomas.
Chair. My question is, when you talk about a risk being a high risk or a low risk, in comparison with what, if you see what I mean? Because what would be a high risk or a social programme might be a low risk or a project. Because building is inherently a risky business. There is risk involved. And if the council wishes to have a housing policy, which it's now, of course, consulting on, if we want to build houses, that isn't a process without risk. Because all the factors, like weather or availability of materials, labour shortages, etc., these things are relatively unpredictable. And so if we want to do certain really important things that the council wishes to do, I think that we've got to accept that a certain risk is involved. So when it says low risk, does it mean low risk according to some sort of mythic absolute standard, or does it mean low risk, bearing in mind that all construction projects are high risk? Do you see what I'm getting at there? Yeah? Okay, so.
Everything, as you said, carries a degree of risk, and the risk appetite target score and the descriptor is how the organisation, how prepared it is to accept any risk. As you said, any large-scale building projects, you have to be open to a certain level of risk. There is a kind of methodology behind it, but you can use lots of different methodologies when you're assessing your risk appetite and your target score. And it doesn't really matter which one you use, as long as you have one, really. And it really is about that decision about how much do you want to take risks. And of course, there are all the categories of risk as well. So it could be financial risk, but if you don't take the financial risks, you may not reap the social benefits of what you want to do. So there's no right or wrong answer to that question, really. It's always a balance and what your priorities are.
Councillor Thomas, follow up.
Let's come back on that. I think there is a risk in saying we're only prepared to tolerate low risk. And the risk is that people will say, no, we can't do that because that's not a low risk. Now, so far as the housing company is concerned, what we're trying to do to lay off risk, to reduce risk, is we are, for example, taking onto the board a new financial person on the non-executive side. We're very far advanced in appointing a finance director on the executive side and somebody to work with them. So the way in which we're trying to give the council confidence is by saying, look, we are employing some really expert people with managerial experience, financial experience, risk management, and audit experience, actually, when you think of the particular individuals we're employing. So what we're doing everything that's within our power to reduce risk, but there are risks that are unavoidable. So my sort of feeling is I'm not sure that I'm happy with saying low risk for the construction, because I think it could be used for turning down, as you just said yourself, projects that would be socially extremely desirable. Yeah, thanks.
Anna.
I think the process you've just described, Councillor Thomas, you're kind of mitigating the risk and you are reducing it from the very beginning. And I think there's a difference between having a risk appetite that is low, but all that means is that when you start one of those projects, you will look for things like, is it fully funded? What arrangements have you got in place to monitor the progress and spend of the project? What is your risk process? So it doesn't stop you from doing anything, but what it does do is give you a framework to work in, and that you start off fully mitigating your potential risks.
Okay. Councillor Barnes and Mr. Farmer.
Yes, I think given our financial situation in general, we do need to reduce our appetite for risk. But I'd really rather start at the other end in a way, because when I look at our risks, I thought we'd agreed as a committee to split risk too, because the housing risks are very different. There is a risk around homelessness because it is a demand-led service. On the other hand, we are coping with that extraordinarily well. So we're doing ourselves a lot less than justice by scoring it at 20. We're actually containing that risk in a way unknown to Eastbourne or Hastings. And really, it's and that's the social one too, because fundamentally we would want actually to cope with the homeless, even if it meant taking on a new council house building programme. That's a slightly different issue. But there is a different risk around housing. One of the difficulties with it is it's not within our control. And that is failure to achieve our housing target or to secure, it's a double-headed risk like so many. We can mitigate that by seeking from the inspector in the local plan a reduction of that target. But again, we would have to have a very realistic evidence base to do that. But that target is now 933, and if we consistently fail to meet it, then we are likely to lose our planning powers, which is a massive risk, to lose control of your own destiny as a local authority in terms of its local plan. So it seems to me that's a quite separate risk, which I would score very high, as opposed to the homelessness one, which I think actually is really, unless something very unexpected happens, is actually now contained. and therefore not as high, not really a red. Red is coming very close to almost certain to happen, whereas on homelessness, I think it's not likely to happen now. That's bound up, obviously, with a later objective about delivering the local plan. Clearly, that one's quite an interesting one to try and assess at the moment, because the deadlines have been extended, but obviously we have to do quite a lot of rewriting. We probably have to do a new search for sites. And as I say, we will probably need to have a much more extensive consultation with the parishes so that they almost produce a new doomsday book for us, so we can produce the evidence to try to convince the inspector to bring that annual total down from 933 to something that is actually feasible, because that is not going to be delivered as a target. So we are at threat there. We could be at threat of using our planning powers. There are steps we can take to mitigate it, but this is a very different risk from the one around homelessness, which is really within our control and where we're actually doing rather well. Clearly, in trying to meet that latter risk, I would be less risk averse, because I think the risk is so high on the downside that it's worth taking some risks on the upside. So, for example, we might be considering reopening the housing finance question and the housing finance account, and thinking of actually doing more along providing housing, because at the moment the market is dead. Most house builders are not building, and most housing associations are actually fighting hard at the moment to upgrade their present stock. They can't sell it because the market is dead, and the more money they spend on upgrading their existing stock, the less they're building new houses. And so I've never seen so few planning permissions coming forward at the moment as we have. If you look at the validation list, you'll know just how unlikely it is that we shall meet our housing target.
Massive, Alan, massive. Don't just give us one word. Go on.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Risk 2, as you say, is specifically about our temporary accommodation and homelessness, and risk 10 is about our planning applications and the applications coming forward on our new targets. The reason it is red for the temporary accommodation and homelessness, and of course this is the risk register of the senior leadership team, there's still a feeling of unease because of the uncertainty with the economic climate, and interest rates are still high. There's still a worry that more homelessness people will be presenting and that we won't be able to meet their needs. But I completely take your point, Councillor Barnes. You know, we are at the moment doing a really good job, and Joe Powell and the housing team are doing a fantastic job in this. We might have erred on the side of caution here, and of course that's something that we can review when we next have the discussion with senior leadership team. On the turning to risk 10, which is about housing applications, I took your advice when we last spoke, and I have contacted Mike Hughes, who is our new head of planning, and he's going to be looking at in more detail at that risk and coming up with a mitigation plan. Although I suspect that you, as Councillor Barnes said, you can't properly mitigate it because of the lack of applications and the extremely high targets that we've got for homes to be built. And so to a certain extent, we will have to tolerate it. But you know, we could come up with a plan for that.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes.
I think I'd like to move that we split that risk. I also think we should review what we're doing on homelessness. we've now got a good deal of evidence over the last couple of years that by taking on stock of our own and actually recycling the money so that actually it costs us a lot less for each homeless family, we are actually coping with that surprisingly well. I think it's about 8 or 9% of our budget, whereas it's up to 33% of Eastbourne and Hastings. And I'm not quite sure why we would deceive ourselves and think we haven't successfully mitigated that risk. I don't anticipate, although I do anticipate more unemployment, I don't anticipate we're going to get a sudden surge of homelessness, which would invalidate. But if we do, we'd have to review the risk again. But at the moment, I think on all likely forecasts, we shall deal with our homelessness better than anybody else. I wouldn't want to score it as a green, but it seems to me an amber would be perfectly satisfactory there. The other one, I do think we need to have a separate line and populate it. I think we can successfully mitigate, but it will require an enormous amount of work. And in the end, we might not be successful, so we might have to tolerate it. But I think we do need to spell out the consequences, because, and particularly to parishes, because to lose our planning powers to the centre would be an absolutely massive loss. I know we haven't got much future as an authority, but to lose it from the new unitary authority would still be a massive loss to us. We need to keep local control of planning.
Just before I come to it'd be Mr. Farmer and then Councillor Thomas, but just to give, because 2 is very much a social risk attached to the not to delivering on the housing numbers, isn't it? It's the risk of homelessness, temporary accommodation. Whereas 10, although it's slightly worded differently, there's an economic risk to not providing. It's not just social, it's the economic financial risk to not providing the housing numbers. It's a different, because if you're looking to the risk description, we can't meet the housing targets, but then the effect is specifically social on our residents, not about losing our. So it does need to be split somewhere, or it needs to be depicted somewhere because of the risk of designation.
I think the split needs to be slightly different. When we actually look at 10 as it's worded, this is an awful lot about process. Really, it seems to me there is a very specific risk now around not so much the failure to deliver the local plan, I'm sure we will, but about whether we can meet the housing targets which have been laid on us by central government. So it's a more complicated picture than our current risk register is actually
that's what I was thinking.
presenting.
There's something else in 10 about, there's something more. Not just, as you say, that's on processes, and we talk about their quality and quantity, but it's also, we haven't put in there the risk of not meeting our numbers in 10, because that is still an economic financial.
Yes, when you look at the risk in 10, it's about appeals. We're actually winning most of our appeals. And even when we lose an appeal, we usually don't get costs awarded against us. Indeed, in one recent appeal, the inspector went out of the way to say if we'd actually defended ourselves rather more adequately, we might actually have won it. But even though he lost it, he still was very dismissive of the idea we'd been wrong in terms of the way we'd approached it. So the costs were not awarded against us. I can't remember when we lost our costs awarded. I think it was probably on Beach Farm. But it's so long ago, I think this one is, in a sense, misstated, therefore, because the real thing is around the local plan rather than about appeals.
Sorry. Anna's just going to reply to that.
Yeah, I take on board all of those comments. At the time that that was written, we'd only recently had the new guidance, and we know a little bit more now, and I think I can split it. Also take your point, Chair, that it's economic, financial stroke social, so I can change that as well. And the other notes that I made is that we can remove the appeals issue from that risk as well.
Thank you. Mr Farmer, then Councillor Thomas. Mr Farmer.
And mine's going back to the subject of the risk appetite. I remember commenting previously that the risk appetites I thought were very high, and I was concerned. I feel much happier that they're now a lot lower, but I'm wondering what process caused this lowering of the risks across a whole swathe of the risks.
So it's in the risk policy that you have to review your risk appetite every year, and this year we took it to Cabinet at an away day, and we had a session on risks. The context behind that as well was, you know, the risks that have been identified and discussed this evening about project and programme overspends, what we're doing to mitigate it. So that's what, there were two things then. So one is the need to review the policy, and then there was the informal feedback that we got from Cabinet.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Chair. I just want to say how much I agree with what you said yourself, what John said, and what you said there, basically, because I think there is a real case to splitting things up. And I think the obvious split is you split housing, that's a thing in itself, and obviously brilliant work has been done by Joe Powell and the team there, and that's a fantastic thing that people are getting housed properly, that's wonderful. But I think John's argument and Brian's implies we also split housing from the other projects, because when you're talking about housing, as has been said, you've got a social risk, you've got a planning risk, you've also got a reputational risk with the government really pushing housing as its sort of number one priority. If we're very much falling behind on that, that's going to give us a bad reputation with the government. It's not going to help anything the council wants to achieve. So I think there is a real case to just taking it a little bit further, a heading to housing, a heading to homelessness, and a heading to other projects. That's what I would argue, and I would agree with John and Brian on that largely. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other? So how do we incorporate? So the first one, the revised risk management model should be approved and adopted. Recommend that. Sorry, Anna.
So there was one thing that I omitted from the policy review, and that in the policy it refers to the Audit and Standards Committee, and I just need to amend that to say Audit Committee. I didn't want to forget that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I meant to point that out to Arday. In fact, he's still online. I meant to point out just in that bit that he refers in their update report twice. It refers to the Audit and Standards Committee, and it's now just the Audit Committee.
My suggested amendment, Chairman, is to approve the risk register subject to the suggested amendments around housing, homelessness and local plan to be incorporated.
From what I can see, I don't think that works. Go on, Anna. I'll say why in a minute.
Yes, sorry to be controversial here, but it's really to note the risk log, because the risk register is a senior leadership's team's risk register. So yeah, definitely, comment on it, and we can take advice.
We'll make it a recommendation, Chairman.
Don't steal my thunder. I was going to say, one is to actually approve and adopt the policy. Then the other was, I was going to say, was to be noted because it is what it is. So then we can add to it the recommendations that it should be, the split should be looking at on housing, like what we said before. We would recommend that to the senior. So it's three things. Yeah, so we approve and adopt the risk management policy, we note the corporate risk register as it is, and we make recommendations for the senior leadership team to look at that risk register.
One more recommendation.
Oh.
Which is, given the current uncertain state, the Cabinet is updated more frequently.
That's probably a question for the Cabinet, but yeah, we could add that to it, that the Cabinet should be, but I'm sure, yeah, I'm sure Anna's just going to tell, she tells them every month. Go on.
Yeah, I was just going to confirm that it was in the audit that the risk register should go to Cabinet at least once a year. And yeah, very, very happy. Obviously, yeah, we've agreed to do that.
Thank you. So I'm looking at Councillor Gray to move that. Thank you. And I'm looking at Councillor Biggs to second it. Thank you. All those in favour, please. Thank you. That is carried. Oh, I wonder why Mr. Angel was still here. Agenda item 11, the internal audit plan for 25-26. Mr. Angel.
Thank you, Chair. Last item for me tonight. This is the audit work plan, internal audit work plan for the 2025-26 and for next year. The summary of this report details the steps taken to prepare the plan itself, and the resources required to deliver it. It also lists the other audit areas considered but not included in the plan. Assurance map on paragraph 5 onwards. I keep this an update every year. It's a visual representation of the various sources of assurance, both internal and external, received by the council. This is then I use this to assist in understanding the assurance received, to evaluate the adequacy, and to highlight any potential gaps in coverage. The revised assurance map is shown in Appendix A, which is page 221, and the assessment methodology, which I use to complete it, is shown in Appendix B. All four areas that are highlighted as either high or medium risk will be subject to further audits reviews in 2025-26. Then it brings me on to the plan itself and resources. The audit plan was compiled based on my own risk assessment carried out in February this year. All activities deemed to be high risk are automatically included in the new plan, except where they have only recently been reviewed or already been monitored elsewhere. The rest of the plan is made up of annual governance audits and medium risk areas that have not been reviewed recently. The plan's in two parts. The plan itself is on Appendix C, and how the plan will be resourced is in Appendix E. The contents of the plan have been discussed at the senior leadership team, and the final version is supported by the Chief Executive. The new plan allows for 500 days of audit work across 20 separate audit reviews and consulting activities. For transparency, I've also included a list of those other areas which are considered when compiling the plan, but which have not been included on this occasion. This is shown in Appendix B. Having seen the plan, hopefully members will agree it provides good audit coverage across a whole range of council activities. So I'm happy to take any questions on the report. Thank you.
The one question I would ask, I suppose, is how much work are the new standards going to take? And have you allowed for yourself time for that?
Possibly not. But we've got various contingencies in the plan, and well, it can probably be absorbed. But if not, I'll let the committee know if it's becoming a bit of a drain. But yeah, so possibly not. But
just make Mr. Akers work far harder, longer. Thank you. Any questions on the audit plan? Thank you. Councillor Barnes. So resolved that the internal plan be approved, moved by Councillor Barnes, seconded by Councillor Gray. All those in favour, please show. Thank you, that is carried. Right, agenda item 12, the sad bit really, because since I've come on to this, it's the recruitment of an independent person for the Audit Committee. And Charlotte will be introducing this, but I just want to say I have been, over the times I've been, God knows how long I've been on this, well, since I stopped being chairman of the council, I was appointed to the Audit Committee. And I found Mr. Farmer's contributions have been invaluable, really, really good to this committee. Very pointed questions, sometimes too pointed, but they presented a proper response and have landed where they were meant to land, shall we say. So I'll come back to you, Mr. Farmer, in a moment, because obviously I've stolen Charlotte's thunder. Charlotte.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, as noted in the report, this committee has the ability to have a non-voting independent person serving the committee, and the terms of reference allow you to consider and recommend to Council the appointment. So as noted already, Mr. Farmer has served the committee since May 2021, and that included the permitted 2-year extension from his original term. And therefore, if the committee wishes to have an independent person, the recruitment process will need to be undertaken and a recommendation in turn made to full council from this committee. So the report outlines the process and the proposed role specifications, skills, competencies, person specification. It's proposed that it will continue to be a remunerated role, and if agreed, the outcome of the recruitment process, I'd hope we'd be in a position to report back to the next committee. And then finally, just on behalf of officers of the council, we'd also like to pass our thanks to Mr. Farmer for his contributions. Thank you.
Just one question, how long did you say since Mr. Farmer's been a member? What month? Oh, I thought he'd been on here for ages. He's been on the same length of time as I have. I know. Where did that time go? And of course, Mr. Farmer isn't allowed to stand for another 2 years. Otherwise, I'm sure he would. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, just to clarify, Mr. Farmer is able to reapply if he would like to be considered. Is my understanding.
Oh,
entirely
okay.
Mr. Farmer's choice.
Well, I wish I hadn't said that now because that's putting pressure on him. So, any questions of Charlotte on this process? I've got one which would end up as a recommendation, which would be I'd like to see the vice chair on the panel as well as the chair. So it's 2 officers and 2 councillors. Please. And if you're nodding with that, I'll make that a recommendation at the end. Okay, I'll add that.
Yeah, that's the wish of the committee.
In that case, I propose amending the second one to read: an interview panel will be appointed comprising of the chair and vice chair of the audit committee, head of finance and deputy chief executive. I think I have to have a seconder for that amendment, don't I? Councillor Gray, I knew you would be. All those in favour of that amendment, which isn't. Thank you. Right, so the full recommendation then is that the council seek to recruit through a competitive external process an independent person for the audit committee. 2, as we've just said, an independent panel be appointed comprising of the chair and vice chair of the audit committee, head of finance and deputy chief executive, and the proposed appointee be recommended to the next available meeting of the audit committee for on-forward recommendation to the council. And I'm sure we're talking well into the new civic year. Can I have a mover for that, please? Well done, Councillor Gray. It'd be a shame to ruin a night. Councillor Biggs seconded. All those in favour? Thank you. Thank you, that's carried. Right, agenda item 13, the work programme. the self-assessment annual review is for us, isn't it? It's us to assess how we've done, which may need to, I think, in that case, go to anyone who is no longer on the committee in June for them to give you their thoughts as to what's gone on before, if you see what I mean. Because it could be a brand new committee and they're not going to be able to do much on the self-assessment front. So that's the only one on there. But any questions on the work? Yes, Councillor Barnes, I know we've got to put in that bit.
We just need to fit in the self-assessment and the training.
Yes.
They won't be public sessions.
No.
So I don't, but they are really part of the work programme, even though they're not public sessions.
If you can put that into the work programme, please. So us having the training on this, or be it informal training on that. And I think we wanted, but I don't know if it's necessary to put it onto this one, which we spoke to Lorna Ford about reviewing the things she has put in place to address some of the previous audits. I don't know if we leave it to perhaps Gary and Lorna to assess when it would be most useful and to put it in the work programme with their agreement and to bring it back to the committee, rather than us saying now do it in June and them going no chance. So,
sorry, Chair, can you just be clear what you want reported there?
That's a review of the things that, well, the restructuring and how it's going. The last piece has just gone into place with the Director of Governance. So at some point, it may even be an audit of you to find out, by you to find out how it's going, but an update to the committee of what improvements have been made. And I can see Councillor Barnes is coming to my rescue. Councillor Barnes.
Well, there are two things we've asked of the Chief Executive tonight. One is an assessment of how the structure is working, and the other is progress on outstanding requirements. It'd be quite sensible, possibly, if they were both in the same presentation from the Chief Exec. And we could leave the timing, I think, to her. I wouldn't want to rush her into a too early a one. But sometime over the summer, either July or September, I think would be appropriate.
So I was right, you were coming in to save me and to put that into two distinct bits, and Lorna is now going to reply.
Thanks, Chair. I think perhaps September, just because our new director doesn't start until the end of June. So just, I think, to give a kind of view on how it's going, that person needs to be in post for a couple of months at least. So I think September sounds about right.
Thank you, but we're not going to hold you to that because we're still leaving it for you and Gary to.
Okay, I'm happier with that. Yeah,
it might just before Christmas.
Thank you.
Thank you. Risk. What have I got here? Oh, risk review to be added to the 9th of June meeting. Was that on there? Were we adding a risk review to the programme? Well, we just said we wanted it on most anyway, didn't we? But then Anna said she would come to most meetings. I'm going to shut up, Anna, and come to you.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you would like me to come to the meeting on Monday, the 21st of July, because it does seem a big gap between now and September for the next review.
Yeah, I'm just looking at what's on there. Yeah, 21st of July to put in the risk review. So that becomes 21st of July. And we've added the bit basically about the new internal audit chart and the strategy, and a general update to us somewhere around June be it informally or in June's meeting. It depends on how big June's meeting is going to be. Well, you've got the progress update on that one anyway, so. Okay. Anything else? In that case, I declare this meeting closed. The next meeting is Monday, the 9th of June. Thank you.